Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're taking a look at a really interesting topic. We're talking about generative AI and how the dramatic rise of generative AI is reshaping investment in technology in truly profound ways. To discuss that, I'm joined by someone who's right in the thick of the action. With me is Brandon Gleklen, principal at Battery Ventures. Brandon, happy Friday to you.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
So to clarify, you are actually a venture capitalist, which means you fund technology companies. You write large checks. I think some of the checks might even have a lot of zeros behind them. So you must get pitched a lot by technology companies.
Yeah, James, that's correct. So, my quick background: I joined Battery back in 2015. So I've been operating as an investor here for almost 8 years now, working across early stage investing all the way through to pre-IPO scale companies, primarily in B2B, and these days spending probably 80 or 90% of my time looking at generative AI businesses.
That is fascinating. Okay, so you really focus. It makes sense that you would be focused on generative AI. I mean, I was amazed. When OpenAI debuted ChatGPT in November 2022, it seemed like everything changed. Like all of a sudden, like artificial intelligence wasn't new, generative AI wasn't even new. But so much seems like, or at least brand new. But it seems like the whole world shifted when the ChatGPT came on the scene. How has that shifted? What kind of business models you look to invest in?
Yeah, so the question around business models is a really interesting one. I think in some ways, nothing's really changed, right? I think high margin, recurring, cloud software businesses still have not gone out of style, and we'll continue to invest in and fund a whole lot of those. Many of which are going to, leverage generative AI and build that into their products. But I do think there are other newer models that I think now become a lot more interesting for venture capitalists who's looking to make investments in something scalable that can reach a really large outcome.
Mhm.
One term that we've been using internally is what I would call Wizard of Oz style business models. I
Hmm.
think if you look at the innovation of generative AI, you can really think of it as powering a lot of new labor automation style use cases. And if you just look at market sizing, markets are much bigger than software markets. The CRM market is quite large, but the market that's even larger than that is how much you're going out and paying salespeople. The design software market is large, but the market for designers is quite a bit larger. And so, what Wizard of Oz means, for us internally is, well, can you actually just automate the work of a designer? Can you automate the work of a salesperson? And maybe you can't do 100% of that today using LLMs or generative techniques. But if you can do 80% of it and augment the remaining 20% with your own internal humans, those potentially become really interesting opportunities when you're really riding this exponential wave of technology at your back. And so that 20% today that you still need real humans for, maybe that becomes 10% in a year, and maybe in 2 years it's 5%. And so the traditional term for describing these businesses are tech-enabled service businesses.
Hmm.
But I think powered by this technology, you'll see a lot of tech-enabled service businesses that were previously using technology to go from a 30% margin business to a 60% margin business. Now might have the 80% margins that we would typically associate with the software business. So that kind of Wizard of Oz style tech-enabled service style model, I think becomes increasingly more interesting as really machines are able to automate a lot more new types of tasks.
Interesting. Okay, so the machines in effect do ever more. But I was reading about a new company a couple of days ago. I won't mention the name, but I'm sure because there's more than one player in that space. But it's some of the generative AI tools will create text and images in response to text prompts. This company is working on creating an entire laundry list of tasks. It will really be a true digital assistant. You can say make me a house blueprint. It won't just draw out the blueprint. It'll do the research. It'll make the blueprint. It'll do everything it needs to do. It's like 5 or 6 tasks all put together across a web interface, API, looking at a data repository. So it's a far more enabled generative AI deployment than traditionally has been. If that makes any
Yeah, I
sense.
mean, you're totally right. I mean, one challenge, frankly, that when we're working with our generative businesses is, it used to be, product innovation was scarce, right? You had to be really thoughtful about the way that you sequence product, because you only have so much product resources, and what modules do you go build, what use cases do you prioritize. The thing that's so flexible about language models, and if you start to play with the GPT-4 API, which by the way is a very approachable technology. I mean, I encourage everybody, even if you're not, you don't consider yourself to be particularly technical or techie, it's really easy to use some of these tools. The breadth of what these tools are able to accomplish is really impressive, and so you're able to do a whole lot. It's less of a process of creation and more of curation sometimes with using these tools. Like where do you spend time? What are the user experiences that you enable? Because they out of the box can already do so much. It's one of the things that's so impressive about the technology.
Well, you may have talked about this a little bit, but I think it's interesting, the idea of a defensible business model. I mean, you're looking for a defensible business model in terms of what you would want to invest in. What does that mean in light of generative AI?
That's the topic du jour. It's a really difficult question. I think it's a good one. 5 years from now, we can have another one of these conversations, and I think we'll all be much smarter, just given how novel the technology is and how quick the pace is of development. I think it's maybe easier to describe what I think is not defensible. And what I would describe as not defensible is the type of user experience that feels like it could be hidden away as a tab or just brought up as a chatbot, right? Mm-hmm. If your iteration, your approach to generative AI is, let's put a chatbot on top of some existing data store. The folks that have the existing data store are probably going to be, the dominant players in being able to bring that to market. And I think a lot of incumbents will do quite well with that, right? You look at, what HubSpot's announced, what ZoomInfo's announced, Salesforce. I think their ability to bring this technology to the fore and deliver really compelling user experiences. I think they'll be able to do really impressive things. I think the companies that end up being more defensible over time are really going to innovate on user experience in fundamentally new and profound ways. I think when I look at a lot of generative AI businesses today, they remind me of really early automotives, really early cars that were just took the horse-drawn buggy, removed the horses, and that's what the car looked like. When I look at all these kind of like chatbot and chat experiences, they kind of just look like ChatGPT, but applied to some business problem, some business function.
Right.
I think in the future, it's a lot going to look like Toyota Camrys or like a McLaren, right? The innovation in what the fundamental technology is, the user experience, I think will totally evolve. And that I think is what will create defensibility to your question, James. I think when you're able to fundamentally really iterate on that user experience to make it seem totally new and totally different compared to what incumbents are doing, that gives people, I think, a chance to create something that others can't immediately just copy.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It seems like, I mean, I was talking to some salespeople, and I thought, the idea of being a salesperson is a customer facing. It's one human interacting with another human, and that individual might be aided by generative AI, but that human to human interaction, I would guess, is going to continue on in the years ahead. Sales be supported by generative AI, but it won't be completely eliminated by it. So I'm thinking something about the human to human interaction won't go away and will become defensible in a business model. Correct, incorrect, or not necessarily?
I think absolutely. Brian Halligan, from HubSpot actually had an interesting tweet about this recently, where he talked about like how is generative AI going to change selling and change sales? I think the thing that becomes commoditized in many ways is content, right? If you want a very hyper personalized message going out to someone that takes into account their proclivities and seems like it was written in a one-on-one way. I think there will be a short-term period where that messaging will be very, very compelling, right? It doesn't take long if you search me on the internet to find out that I'm a big Philadelphia Eagles sports fan, or that
right.
I went to college in Philadelphia and I grew up in Washington D.C. My anticipation is I'm going to get a lot of very personalized messaging coming my way from brands that incorporate all of those things and make impressive football puns, or refer to the stores down the street from where I grew up.
Right.
But the things that I think will not ever be automated away is that human to human connection, right? When you can tell, like, actually, this wasn't written by some bot and force fed to me. It's some human is talking to me and connecting with me on a personal level and taking into account my unique needs and what I'm exactly looking for in a product. Like that stuff I think will never go out of style. And so, in fact, I think that human element becomes enhanced sort of in this world where, again, highly personalized content becomes commoditized.
It's true. I see. Okay, I totally see what you're saying about enhanced because there's telephone service, and we know the telephone service tends to be abysmal these days, where there's a long decision tree and it's automated, and we really don't get taken care of on the phone. Those rare businesses that will actually answer the phone and help you, suddenly they gain all those points just because, oh my God, there's a human. Like there's not even a bot, it's actually a human. But I guess to look almost at, in a larger question, who do you see as the winners and losers as generative AI gains adoption? Who's going to win here?
I think the winners are going to be the people who build. I think, James, to your question earlier, we spent a lot of time, twiddling our thumbs in our chairs, thinking about, well, what actually is going to be the moat, right? Why don't, the incumbents just end up winning these spaces?
Right.
Right. Like who actually ends up succeeding? The way that I look at it is you've got a massive technology shift going on, and the people who are most likely to capture the opportunity are just people who get out there and start building things, getting real product in people's hands. And in some ways, like don't think too hard about it. I think there are a lot of opportunities just kind of like sitting on the floor for people to go after and solve for. And maybe it doesn't feel super differentiated today when you first get started, but it's not that different from the early generations of cloud companies. You build a product, you get users using it, you use that feedback from users to better curate the user experience and build better products. I think this is a really fertile ground just for new company creation, and for people who take a builder's mindset, who prioritize getting product in the hands of real people, and don't worry too much about the strategic implications, but just go for it. I think those are the folks that are most likely to really win and succeed in a big way.
Well, I guess the skeptic might say, okay, I like the spirit of just going for it, but of course, a generative AI platform might make what I build generally obsolete 3 to 5 years from now. So, gosh, I don't, maybe a more specific way to ask the question is, I think you said something along the lines of, there are ideas even, laying on the ground, there's to pick up and run with. Care to say what any of those ideas might be? And I'm sure people would really listen into this.
Yeah, it's when I think about it, I think there are some immediately graspable large ideas that a lot of people are going after right now. One that I think is particularly resonant is around knowledge management. Right, there's so much information that we have sitting in our email or in our Slack. Who's the subject matter expert on a specific task? What was discussed in that meeting? I think there will be a large player, probably a public company one day, that is able to basically grasp all of enterprise knowledge and just allow you to have a conversation. Who should I talk to about this if I want to learn about this aspect of our product, or what was discussed in that meeting that I wasn't able to join. I think there will be a user experience that brings everybody together and folks work on that. And I think a lot of very, very smart teams are going out and working on that problem, and it'll be a very competitive landscape. We're excited to back those companies, but what also gets us excited about is what I kind of think of as being the new vertical software, is the way that we've been terming it internally, which is, there are a lot of these niche areas that I think are particularly potentially prone for disruption. There was a really interesting paper that was published, I think it was a Stanford researcher published it, that talked about using language models as corporate lobbyists. Really interesting. Really interesting example and use case. Basically, and this isn't a company today. This is just paper.
Right.
The way that they described it is, you could train a language model to really understand who you are as a company and what your company does. It can read proposed legislation coming from Congress. It can discern, is this legislation impactful to our company or is it not? And if so, draft an email to your representative or draft a letter to your representative, discussing the legislation, what you'd be in favor of, what you wouldn't be in favor of. Seems like a really useful tool, right? Now, is that a really large end market? Is that, if you did the market sizing on that, is that a billion-dollar revenue company? I don't know. It might just be like a 25 or $50 million revenue company. But maybe you start with that, and then you take on that use case, and then you kind of learn about this other thing over there because you at least started somewhere, and then you go to that next thing. And so I think if you take a pretty niche view, right? You don't need to think super big. The super big opportunities are of course exciting, but they're probably for all of us. There's something in our life where there's that similar opportunity to that lobbyist example where you can just take this small niche and automate an aspect of it, and you start there, and then you go to something else. And that's very similar to a lot of the vertical software businesses that we invest in that started in something that's kind of small and something niche, but then grew out of it to go do different things.
Interesting. So it's really focusing on a given vertical, or even a vertical within a vertical, whether it's finance or healthcare or education. It's not trying to be the be all to end all, but it's really focusing on a niche. Interesting. Well, let's look to the future. And here's a big question that it's the several billion-dollar question, multi-billion-dollar question. The future of generative AI in terms of how it affects businesses. I think that the answer to that is probably a 4-hour monologue. So I think it's not even fair to ask that question, but I'm asking you anyways, Brandon. What do you think are some key milestones we can expect in the years ahead?
It's been fascinating just to see the pace of innovation. I mean, it feels like daily there's big pieces of news being announced. Just in terms of how I'm spending my day, right? I'm probably spending in terms of my new deal sourcing activity, maybe I'm spending 50% of my time talking to companies. Maybe I'm talking to 15, 20 generative AI companies a week. But I'm also spending 50% of my time just reading research, which on a personal level has been a real joy. To spend a lot of time, I just mentioned that paper coming out of Stanford. I spent a lot of my time doing that to try to figure out where the puck's going and all of this. It's hard to really say. I think in some ways, what the future looks like 5 or 10 years from now. And if we were looking back 10 years ago to 2013, even before this kind of big trend, think about how different the world was in 2013 versus now.
Right.
Is really hard to do. And so, I kind of think what's sort of incumbent on us as investors is, we're not going to know the future completely. The underlying technologies are going to evolve a lot. So for us, really, like the thing that we need to focus on is just working with founders, working with operators that we think can just skate to where the puck's going, right? Be nimble and not be too stuck in their ways, because the thing that you build today, it might be obsolete in a year from now, right? OpenAI just releases that as their new thing.
Right.
To give a very specific example, which might be instructive, I spend a lot of time, a lot of brain power and brain cells and late nights thinking about how to optimize context windows. So for folks who aren't familiar, you can see this in ChatGPT. You only get a certain amount of basically characters that you can write to prompt ChatGPT to give you a certain answer. And at that point, you had basically 8,000 tokens of basically that was your limit in terms of what you could do to prompt. We spent a lot of time thinking about how to optimize that. And then OpenAI goes out and announces, actually we're boosting that to 32K. And so all that time I spent about thinking optimizing 8K, that just 4x'd. Or all the time that we've been thinking about optimizing cost, right? OpenAI says, oh, we're gonna cut the price by 90%, right? Like, so being too dogmatic about any specific detail, this is a poor time to be doing that. But I think if you say if you just focus on flexibility, if you just be a voracious reader, voracious consumer, get your hands dirty in this tooling and really using it as a practitioner, that's going to give yourself the best shot.
Interesting. Well, the other interesting thing that I find about generative AI is that there have been some really major technology, shifts forward in the last 5-10 years. Obviously cloud, but even something like containers and Kubernetes. And obviously that was a really big deal when it first came in the scene, but no one heard of it outside of technology. Like the word Kubernetes would mean nothing to the person on the street. Well, it means a lot to people in the information technology industry. I mean, generative AI feels like it is swept across, the B2B world and the B2C world. And I think there's probably big disruption coming. Not all of it is going to be happy with people. I mean, I think that we don't really know what's coming. I think there's a certain amount of worry about it as well. I don't know my question is, but I just think there's a promise and there's a threat here. Thoughts on that?
I think the ethical implications are very important here. I think having a perspective on alignment, basically the process of making sure the machines are working with us, like in concert to accomplish goals, and they're not working over us and becoming, our robot overlords.
Right,
So
right.
some of that is some of it has felt outside the Overton window, or just like a little bit bombastic to talk about
Uh-huh.
before. But
Okay.
you look at folks like Jeff Hinton, who's a pioneer in the space, who recently left Google to sort of
Right.
warn everybody about the potential impacts here. I think it's something for folks to take seriously. And I think as an investor, it's important to have a perspective. I mean, I think if I was a generative AI founder, you'd want to have a conversation with your prospective investor on what are their thoughts about alignment, what's their approach to it, how can you responsibly and ethically build an AI product. It'll be different for different types of companies. For some companies, I think it'll be a lot more it's going to be a lot more front and center, thinking through some of these ethical concerns. I think for a large whole host of others, it's going to be how do you make somebody's day at work a little bit easier. It's not different than other cloud companies, but
Right.
but it's an important topic that deserves a lot of thought and scrutiny, and for us in the investing community to have our eye on it.
Definitely. Yeah. Well said. Brandon, you said it. I mean, it's a brand new area. It's going to be actually fascinating to see how it evolves, and we don't really know how it's going to evolve at this point. But I hope you come back at some point and share your insight, and we'll see what's going to happen in the future. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, James. It was a pleasure.